Good morning and welcome to the Policy Committee for the Board of Education for Frederick County for Wednesday, May 26, 2021. First thing we have on the agenda are the minutes from the Policy Committee on April 14th, 2021. Do we have a motion for approval of those minutes? Motion. I'll second. All those in favor? Motion or meeting minutes are so approved. At this point, we will entertain public comment. I do not see anybody present, so we will move on to 1.04, which is Policy 116, Title IX Sexual Harassment. This is a new first time. Ms. Cannon.
Okay. Well, I wanted to give just a recap. When we met March 24th, I came before the Policy Committee and I did like a PowerPoint summary of the new Title IX regulations and indicated we did attend statewide training. And I asked for direction from the Policy Committee that we have two sexual harassment policies, and did we want to look to merge those, and that is the recommended advice and how other colleges and school systems are doing it, because one of the paramount responsibilities under the Title IX reg is I shouldn't have to go to multiple places to look how to file this complaint, what happens if I do, whether I'm an employee or a student. So with that direction of the Policy Committee, I looked at the regs, I met with in-house attorneys, and then I developed the draft that's before you today. And then I had the two attorneys that did the statewide training look at it to make sure I was in compliance with the new regs. I did take some of the language that we had, our policy statement. We had some things we felt, I know, very important to maintain in this. So I wanted to maintain some of that language. For example, our policy commitment statement. This board also shared with me wanting to make an unequivocal statement about you don't cross the line with relationships with kids, the dating, you just don't go there. Now that's implied in sexual harassment, but I pulled that over because that was something very important. The definition section, I did footnote, what is stalking, what is domestic violence versus just having, the legal code, because people don't know where to grab that definition. So you'll see that looked a little burdensome, but that has been direction that the board and policy committee have given me in the past that, I know how to go out and look for those codes, but other people do not. And then the training section. Who has to be trained? What do they need to be trained on? How often? So you'll see that was probably bigger than the regs required, but that has been direction that our board and policy committee have given me. So I did look at what did we have, what was the direction of the board, what do I need to do to comply with the new regs, and merge the two into this 20-page new policy. So I feel pretty good about it, but I will say to you, I do think it's a work in progress. One, there is now a new commission under the Biden administration, and they are reviewing these regs. I don't think they're going to take anything out, but I think they're going to build on. Relatively, we might see some new and specific language on sexual orientation and gender identity because they want to make some unequivocal statements relative to that. So again, I would bring those changes back. If we do get the approval of the Title IX coordinator, then I'll have some language changes as far as identifying that individual if they're in that role as an investigator, and certainly they will be facilitating the grievance procedure, the appeal process, etc. But my goal today is to walk through any pages that you have any questions on, and if we can get a good draft that we feel comfortable going for a first reading, because this is an area that kind of like the teaching of controversial issues, we do need to set up some time-sensitive training this summer, with that. And then, like I said, if we get that new position, then I'd really like the person to hit the ground running. And I think this certainly sets that individual up, because if not, they would have had to do all of this relative to what we've done up to this point. So with that, I'll pause and just see, because this obviously it's 20 pages, it's a lot of information. So what would be your preference as far as how you want to review the policy?
Well, I think, I have a couple things I noted in going through it. And again, there's a lot of legal language in here, and I can't talk to the legalese as far as that part of it. But the one thing I did want to point out, and I just want to make sure that we're clear
Okay.
in the document, item 2G says member of the FCPS school community means board members, FCPS employee, FCPS volunteer, student, or any other person who participates in activities of FCPS or is present on FCPS grounds or premises and is under the authority or control of FCPS. And then you go to another place. Let's see if I can find where I highlighted that. Where it was talking about where it was applied, and it had to do with, again, talking about an FCPS event or other properties that were under FCPS's control.
Right.
And I just want to make sure that we're clear and consistent in the language, because if you read G, at the end it does say, or is present on FCPS grounds or premises and is under the authority or control of FCPS. Again, having had this issue before, I want to be clear that we are clear that if it's a official FCPS event that isn't on FCPS property, that it still applies. And I'm not sure, well, the other place I thought it stated more clearly than in G, because in G, it says, or is present on FCPS grounds or premises and is under the authority of FCPS. And so I think it would be more, again, just clear to say is on an FCPS property or any property where an official FCPS event is being held.
Okay.
Something, I just want to make sure that we're consistent
Yeah.
throughout the document and that it is clear that it not only applies if you're on a school property, but if you're at a retirement function
Yeah.
at the ARC that FCPS is holding,
Right.
that's,
That would certainly
Yeah.
be. Yeah, we can certainly clarify that. And so, Brad, the intent of the law is twofold. One is who has the responsibility to report? Any member of the FCPS community. So that's why they're defining it here. Then they're saying what behavior is under the control of the school system. And the one example that they gave is if a student is at home on the computer harassing somebody on the computer, is that under the control of FCPS? And that will be fact-driven. So you're very astute in that
Right.
you were like, hey, why aren't these perfectly matching? One is the duty to report.
Right.
One is, what do you do if they're on the computer, they're not in an FCPS activity, can you still do it? That's on a fact-driven basis. If it connects back into the school, meaning I harassed you on the computer tonight, and then tomorrow you don't come to school because you
Right.
don't want to see me. Now it's back into the school, it's under our authority, because if I call you and say, my daughter's not coming in today because of something happened on the computer last night, the law says that's fact-driven, and you got to walk it back. So maybe it's not under the control of FCPS, but there's going to be those scenarios that if it happened there and you can show it came back into the school, now that is under your authority. But I hear what you're saying. You want me to make sure that you have a duty to report, and on your policy statement, it says, as far as where this conduct cannot happen, and it's under any activity that,
I had it, which page is
I
the,
think that
I was
is-
looking at it and then I lost it. Okay, actually, so 5A, sexual harassment is prohibited in properties,
Yeah.
activities, programs, and in employment, whether occurring on FCPS
Yeah.
premises, FCPS-controlled properties, or at activities or functions supervised and sanctioned by FCPS.
Yeah. And that's one thing we did retain.
That's page 5.
That's page 5, 5A.
5A.
Yeah.
So I want to say I'm surprised to hear you say that sexual harassment, say, between students online would not be covered by this policy. I would advocate that it should be covered. by this policy.
Well, let me ask a question to add on to what you're saying.
Yeah.
If they were using an FCPS Chromebook and an FCPS hotspot, is that considered now under our control?
Yeah, and I will tell you that how we've interpreted this, because David, this has been a very big legal debate, and the legal word is there's a nexus, and 9 times out of 10 there is. We don't have any, we once in a while have a parent challenge our authority to do that, but if you look at the definition, it says it occurred under an educational program or activity. And so if something happens over the weekend between people, sometimes parents will call and say, I want you to get involved. And we'll say, we might not have the authority to discipline, but we can certainly mediate this. We certainly can do an intervention relative to that. But 9 times out of 10, we can do both because there is that nexus back to school. It is impacting their school environment. But from a legal perspective, someone could challenge it. If something happened over the weekend, it never impacted their school, educational programming or activity. The law is very clear. Here's that sphere of your legal authority. And if something happened outside of school and you're going to put it under this sphere, you got to show it connected to their educational program.
So, Jamie, could I ask that? So let's say that it happened on the weekend and it may or may not have affected the other person's school, but they did it using our computer and our internet.
Yeah.
Do we have culpability to then say, all right, even though that really didn't affect this person's school, we have the right to take that computer
Absolutely, and that's in the
internet
acceptable
back
use
from
policy.
you.
If you
Yeah.
use any of our devices to harass, discriminate, et cetera, you lose the privilege.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, great question.
Yeah, I mean, on that overall, I'd like to consider, I guess, the broad effects that that sexual harassment in that case between students could have, even not using FCPS, Wi-Fi, or laptop. I don't know. I think that the absence, the student then being absent the next day would be one very specific consequence, but if it's action that would be, if it's action between students that would be considered sexual harassment on school grounds, I personally would like to see this also reflected in the policy online, that that sexual harassment between students would be prohibited in any setting.
Well, and you have to remember that under Title IX, it says it's conduct that is so pervasive it impacts your education. But this policy also says maybe you didn't meet that high definition, because that's a high definition, didn't really impact your education. And what this policy says, because when this kicks in that it now meets the new definition of sexual harassment, there's a formal complaint process, there's within 3 days we have to give supportive measures, et cetera. A lot of rights kick in. This says maybe it doesn't meet that definition, but it's still sexual discrimination. It's still inappropriate behavior. Then we treat it as a typical bullying or discrimination. And that's why the form student fills out is the form that says, maybe this didn't meet this definition, but this felt bullying, harassing, or discriminatory, and then we can intervene. So that's why I'm going to recommend that we maintain that is still the student form that gets completed. Because I think that then naturally, and that's where we go now with them. But as far as all the rights that kick in under this new definition, it is that it's so pervasive that it did impact, and it's typical, not a single event, unless it can be a single event, but that usually is a sexual assault of some type, not just a derogatory word. Usually in sexual harassment case law, it'll say, just me, calling you a name is not going to be so pervasive that it reads this new definition, but it's still inappropriate and we wouldn't tolerate it because it's discriminatory. You said that comment based on my whatever protective status.
Okay.
So, Jamie, in the investigative report section, it refers
Okay.
to that the parties shall have 10 days to submit a written, and it has that a couple of times. Again, is that 10 hard days, 10 business days, 10 days without holidays? Should we be
That's
more specific? 10 days.
10 days.
So regardless if it's 2 weekends and a holiday in there.
The
Okay.
only exception they made is when they indicated 3 days. Because the Title IX coordinator, let me see where it says 3 days. I think there was one area. Now, if you look under notice of allegations, if I'm
Which
filing a
section?
formal complaint, I need to do it within 5 working days.
Which
So-
section are you on? Sorry.
So that's just under section C on page 12.
Okay,
So if the law said 5 working days or 3 working days, then that was very intentional. I pulled that right from
Right.
the law. If it doesn't say working, it's straight days.
it's assumed straight days,
Mm-hmm.
okay. Okay. And I was wondering, under the confidentiality section, would it be beneficial in there to, and I don't know if this is appropriate to be put under that program, but the confidential hotline service that we have,
I like that.
to have that put in there too, in case somebody wanted to.
Now, are you talking
utilize
about the
that.
fraud hotline? 'Cause
Yeah,
don't-
but I do, I mean, I know it's a fraud hotline, but I think other things get reported there as well.
I'll check
I
on
know they
that.
have been, whether they're supposed to be or not.
Because now we've set up a confidential email that comes into HR and legal.
Right.
That if you've been harassed in any way, here's your avenue to make sure that
Yeah.
gets fast-tracked. But I'll check the fraud hotline.
Because that is, one thing, and particularly more, I think, on the employee side probably than the student side, that people are scared or intimidated that they may be found out if they report something, and particularly even if it's going into an anonymous email. I think we're all skeptical that our emails are all confidential, and not because of FCPS, just because of today's technological world, that I just, again, want to make sure that people that feel that they have an issue,
Well, sexual harassment complaints have to have a name.
yeah.
You cannot
Yeah.
report it anonymously.
But at least the starting point that they can go in somewhere confidentiality to understand the process that they're going to go through. And that's the part that, again, they have to have somewhere to start. And so they have to have an initial connection to say, here's the process. I mean, the policy says that, but we all know many people are not going to go read the policy. They're going to reach out and say, hey, this happened, what do I do?
Well, and I think the policy will encourage more third-party reporting, meaning I saw this.
Right.
Because this does have some teeth to it, that now anybody in the FCPS community that has knowledge or has observed sexual harassment needs to report it, or they can be subject to discipline.
Right.
And that'll be part of the training. So, and therein lies this policy that says you saw something, you reported it, maybe anonymously emailed to legal services, maybe you just, you can call me anonymously and tell me. And now I go to David and say, David, I have reason to believe somebody's not treating you appropriately, and it could be deemed sexual harassment at FCPS. And you say, I don't want you to do anything. I don't want you to file a complaint. I want it dropped. Under the new law, the Title IX coordinator says, I appreciate that, but we have a paramount responsibility to make sure people are treated. So you could say, I'm not signing it. The Title IX coordinator then signs it and then investigates it to the extent he or she can. So that's another big, what I'd call a big area that this law has, that's a pretty big punch, relative to our legal responsibility to make sure if we see it, we have to report it, and we can't ignore it, even if somebody says, don't. And that was very controversial, because that takes away your right. If you say, look, I'm fine with it, I dealt with it my own way, I need closure on it, I don't want you guys to do anything about it. So that was very controversial.
One question I had with regard to, I guess, confidentiality, I was surprised on page 10 that the address of the complainant needs to be part of the report. I think I understand that the name of the complainant should be part of the report, but it feels unsafe to be giving the person who is accused of sexual harassment the home address of the person making the complaint.
That's an excellent point, and I don't know, that's in the law, but I don't know that we need to state that in the policy, and I believe it's in the law because under the regs, it says if this happened in a non-US location, you don't have to investigate it. And that applies more to colleges with students abroad.
Could that
So-
address be the business address?
I
the
don't think we
school
need to put
address?
it in.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that pertains more to higher ed, relative to that. So I think that's an excellent point.
So-
I would not feel uncomfortable
You-
removing that.
Okay. But you also brought up the international piece, and yeah, that surprised me as well. I think that's on page 5, B. I'm seeing conduct is not deemed sexual harassment for purposes of this policy if the conduct occurred outside of the United States.
Yeah.
And is the law, as you have reviewed it, requiring us to put that restriction if there were some international travel that the school system organized and sexual harassment occurred? Is there a reason this policy would not apply?
Yes, this policy would not apply because this federal law is not recognized outside of the United States. That doesn't mean that if we had a student studying abroad and it occurred, that we wouldn't intervene. But it wouldn't be that we had to, within 3 days, we got to give you supportive measures within 10 days. And I think that was written more, like I said, for higher ed. We don't have a lot of occasions, anymore, especially because we don't do international travel anymore. But in the event that we would come back to that, typically the responsibility falls to where the student is. So let's say the student is in Sweden. They have some type of sexual harassment laws there, and all their laws will then follow. It's no different than if we had a student in an FCC program. We would have to do the investigation joint, and both the FCC policy and our policy would apply. And if the perpetrator is a higher ed student, they have to have a live hearing, where here we don't have to have a live hearing. So there's some trickiness too with our students just being in higher ed. But this requirement, all these conditions would not apply, but we would still, again, in partnership with that abroad institution, coordinate that. And we could footnote that. I think we did that for one of our dual enrollment policies, that, although this might not apply, in the event that we had a student, that we would then partner with that organization where they are to ensure that the sexual harassment investigation occur.
Some sort of footnote on that, I
Okay.
think, is important.
I agree.
Jamie, on page 22, I would ask that we amend bullet point 4 to just say the teacher asks personal inappropriate questions about sexual activity and take out the boyfriend/girlfriend. Everything else is fairly gender neutral. I don't think there's anything positive to add by putting that in there, just to say, ask inappropriate questions about sexual activity.
Okay. Well, and too, I'm wondering too, if where we say teacher or coach, these were examples that we received at training, that these are red flag areas, and this was actually something in Maryland law that passed, but we could just say,
FCPS staff member, or,
yeah.
but would that also apply to student? So FCPS staff or student ask inappropriate questions, or?
Well, the student, we have, pretty good training. This was specific training that was,
Okay.
or a law that was passed as far as, if you're hearing about these rumors or red flags at the school level as an administrator, you need to hit pause and investigate. And so those were things that, were carried over. So they're more along the lines of the training, including relative to staff behavior.
And then again, in bullet point 1, just change the last sentence to does not have that student in their class
Okay?
instead of his or her.
In there, okay. With a teacher, particularly when the teacher does not have, or when the staff member, okay.
In their class, yeah.
Okay, I think those are good edits. I'll circle back on that.
Question, and I know that this applies to staff, but I do know that we have many circumstances where we have contractual folks that are in our buildings, and I know obviously we can't make this apply to their employment, but do we, or should we have a circumstance where we ask folks that are working in our buildings regularly to say that we're expecting you to comply?
No, this does apply to them.
So it does apply even if they're
Yeah,
not
and
our
they'll-
employee?
And they'll have to sign off that they read and reviewed this.
Okay.
Yeah, now
Okay.
now this
So
does.
that would be to any, would that be just to any contractor? Would that also, is that volunteers? So is that parent volunteers?
So it would definitely directly apply to volunteers, and this would be part of our volunteer training.
Okay,
The vendor that comes in and out, we now will put in the vendor contract, just like you're acknowledging you've been fingerprinted, you acknowledge
Right.
you don't do drugs on, school campus. Morgan now would insert this,
right, okay.
yeah.
One general question I have, I mean, I'm hopeful that we are able to, keep the Title IX coordinator position within the budget. On the off chance that it doesn't stay, can this policy still be implemented?
Yes, I mean, the short answer is, if a law is passed and we need compliance, it's gonna be complied with. And so what occurs now, David, when we have a discrimination complaint or one of sexual harassment, it pretty much goes to the top of my list, or Tim's list, or Curtis's list, or a director's list. If we have to investigate something of this nature, it goes to the top of our list, and then other tasks, get less priority, but they're very labor intensive. And so this could really consume 40 hours easy. So what we've been doing, I had 2 complaints that needed to be investigated over the summer, and I retained our former director of HR, Paula Lawton. So she's been an HR consultant because these things can't wait, and she's skilled and experienced. I've also used outside attorneys to come in and do it. So we always will take the measure to ensure compliance, but now, with a system our size, it will be nice to have, if we do get this, to have a person, because these people are coming in doing an investigation, but a Title IX coordinator is going to oversee it all. Did we give supportive measures? I'm housing in a database all complaints. I'm making sure everybody gets this training by this date. So you have somebody this is what they do. But right now, we're ensuring compliance, but with the position, I think we can be very proactive as far as setting the culture and reinforcing the culture. And not only Title IX, but the person will also do EEOC compliance. So any discrimination based on any protected category.
And I think that's the most important part of the question I had, I guess, but even very specifically, would the language in this policy have to be tweaked to remove the Title IX coordinator position if the position were not to exist in FCPS? Or
No, 'cause
could the
somebody has to
language
serve.
stay?
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Or could the language stay and it sounds like you're saying someone else would wear the Title IX coordinator hat in addition to their other duties?
That's what would
Correct.
happen.
Where I'd say the Title IX coordinator could be, right now, it could be me, it could be Tim, it could be Curtis.
Okay.
We could then delegate it out to principals to investigate at the school level, and then one of us will kind of oversee that. So it's kind of splintered out, but we're making sure that it certainly occurs. So yeah, I mean, that's what we've done, up to this point. And fortunately, we don't get a voluminous amount of cases, but when they come, we got to stop and we got to make sure it's the priority.
So Jamie, and again, this is just a wording so we don't get boxed in. When it says Title IX coordinator arranges, to me, that implies a person that is in that position. Should it be something, or maybe just at one place in the documents say, whenever we're referring to Title IX coordinator, it would be Title IX coordinator and/or their designee in the event, because that person could be on vacation, that person could be ill.
Okay.
There's somewhere in the document to state that whenever we're referring to Title IX coordinator, that would be Title IX coordinator or whoever's designated in that position in the
that
event
role.
that,
Yeah, that's a good idea. Because let's say we have a Title IX coordinator.
They gotta take
they're dealing with
vacation.
3 cases.
Yeah.
Or they're dealing with 3 cases.
Yeah.
Now they've got to designate and they got to.
Right.
Because this, like I said, you've got to coordinate IDEA if it's a special ed student. ADA, you could do emergency removals. So there's a lot of responsibility that falls to that person.
And that person could be contractual versus an employee too as well. So again, maybe to state that in there, this could be as well, it could be a contractual relationship or somebody that's being retained to handle cases.
Well, I
Something so it's, I think, just, and it just could be, it doesn't have to be every place, but one place to say whenever we're referring to Title IX coordinator, that could be the Title IX coordinator, the designee, or even somebody on or a firm on a contractual
Contractual
basis that we're
basis, yep.
using to
To ensure compliance
to
is
ensure
met.
compliance,
Mhm,
yeah.
I like that. Okay.
That was really all the comments that I
Those were good ones, thank you.
had.
I had a question about emergency removal of a respondent on page 9.
Okay,
I mean, I certainly think that's an important part of this policy and might be a necessary step in some cases. There's also, it's a significant step as well to have someone removed from receiving their education. And so, yeah, I mean, will data be collected and periodically reviewed on how often respondents have been removed from school, for how many days, and maybe some demographics on the respondents who are removed from school?
yeah, and you'll see, I think, I don't recall what page it's on, David, but the Title IX coordinator now has to maintain a record of all complaints, how they were resolved, any supportive measures, and any removals. So now this individual, it's one-stop shopping as far as when this comes in, because some of this would be delegated at the school. An AP typically will investigate a sexual harassment complaint at the school level, under the supervision of the Title IX coordinator. Now it's under the supervision of HR. So because you have one person that's the coordinator, they now hold the legal responsibility of being the point person for the school system, because we now have to report that. We have to report it in a federal report, and it looks like MSDE is going to ask us to report that, because I noticed that was part of the training that we do have to. So I know that's a long answer to say yes.
Will there be opportunity built in for the board to review that data?
Sure, sure. Because there's a couple things. Well, first of all, under the new law, the board as an entity has responsibility for compliance. So that's why I'm going to recommend, certainly they're very hands-on with the development of the policy, but then when we start to do training, to even just do a 1-hour training session on the responsibilities under the policy. And then just like we do now, we do a Title IX annual report for athletics. We can do a Title IX report for sexual harassment complaints.
Okay. I might have, let me just look through questions. Yeah, I guess on page 14 with
Okay.
the investigator. I feel like you were speaking to this a little bit, but I want to make sure I
Sure.
fully understand.
Okay?
As I'm reading this policy, the investigator is often, or maybe always, separate from the Title IX coordinator. Is that the case, and why would we want it to be separate, the investigator to be separate from the Title IX coordinator?
So David, how I'm envisioning is the Title IX coordinator is going to be expert in this, and he or she can serve in the role of an investigator, unless, remember when I said, you said, I don't want to file a complaint, the Title IX coordinator then can sign the complaint. So I can't sign the complaint and investigate it. So in those circumstances, when the Title IX coordinator steps in and says, I know it, you don't want me to investigate it, but I'm going to sign this form to say there's something here. So that's the only circumstance under the law where they can't serve. But I'm envisioning that and you'll see in the definition, it says they either conduct or facilitate or assign the investigation. And those words were very intentional in the policy. But I believe, starting out, that this person can serve. They can't serve in the role of investigator and decision maker, but they can be coordinator and investigator unless they've signed the form.
That distinction makes good sense to me. Certainly, if they're the one signing the form, they shouldn't then be investigating. I'm not certain, but potentially in the investigator section, it could be worth saying, often will be Title IX coordinator.
Okay.
Or others can serve in this role.
Okay. As a matter of fact, David, I think I might have wrote that as I was looking at this morning. I think I might have already. I put note, Title IX coordinator may serve in the role of an investigator in cases, unless it's a case where they've been the signatory on the complaint. So I caught that this morning, so I really appreciate you bringing that up. But yeah, I totally agree with that, and I'll take care of that.
Great. I think those are my questions.
So Jamie, one other, I found, asked if you could just go through the document on 16D again, where it says, talking about the superintendent, it says in his or her role, just anywhere where it's his or her, just change them to there.
So is it there? Oh, because if you're saying the
In their
supervisor
role as
designee, then it
decision
comes
maker.
there, yeah.
Yeah, instead of saying in his or her role as decision maker, in their role as decision maker.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. You can tell you're in a doctorate program. But that's good. That's what we need. Any other questions?
So what we would do is then bring this for a first reading to the board. I'm assuming this policy will probably take a couple readings
Yeah.
to give everybody a chance to go through it and digest it and think about it. So
Yeah.
we will plan that for the next board meeting.
Okay, so I'll make the edits based on the recommendations that you and David provided. Then I'll schedule it for a first reading for a work session, and then we'll go from there.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. I did want to announce to the public that starting with the next meeting in June, we will be switching our time to 11 a.m. instead of 10 a.m.
Okay.
That'll be starting with the next meeting.
All right.
And that will be announced publicly before the meeting, but just giving you the heads up that we will be at 11 o'clock on June, what was that, Catherine?
23rd?
June 23rd. Okay. Any other comments for the good of the cause?
And David, you did get my email back. I did review your comments with HR, and I will be bringing those to the June meeting, policy 300, but I'll also bring the companion regulations so you can see, because that's where a lot of the changes we did based on some of the feedback that the Racial Equity Committee provided. So I'll
Yes,
bring that
yes.
to June 23rd.
Very good.
No other comments? We are adjourned.
Thank you.